Welcome to another episode of Beyond the Numbers, a budget episode. And as ever, joined by my esteemed colleague, the tax knowledge that is Tom Biggs. Tom, welcome. The
Hey, Chris.
dust is settling from what was a fairly big set of announcements
Yeah,
in
yeah.
some parts of the press. It was described as the nightmare on Downing Street.
I did see that. Yeah,
In others, people are saying, well, much needed funds for public services. So clearly there are two sides of the political arguments to all of this. But from our perspective, big picture, going down to, what it means for individuals and SMEs, we're looking at 40 billion pounds worth of tax rises,
yeah,
and 32 billion pounds of borrowing, and those tax rises predominantly aimed at businesses
yeah,
and the taxation of wealth. And I believe that this takes the tax take up to a new record level not seen before,
yeah.
which leads to the question, can the tax take be this high, but you also achieve the much needed growth that Chancellor Rachel Reeves was talking about? And I guess only time will tell. But the
Yeah,
point
yeah,
is the OBR predictions, their projections, I should say, suggest very anemic growth, really sort of getting down to 1.5% in a couple of years. That's not much.
yeah.
So anyway, with that being the big picture, Tom, looking at the key announcements that might affect our clients, I guess we'll start with employment tax, national insurance, living wage.
Yeah. So this was obviously the sort of flagship policy, if you like, from yesterday, one that has been in all the headlines and is the main one that comes up. So not overly surprisingly, given it was sort of leaked beforehand that the manifesto pledge related to employee NIC
I think it
not
was
going
almost
up.
all leaked, wasn't it? The
Yeah,
Speaker of the House of Commons had a huge go at them about it.
yeah, yes. So we thought it was coming in relation to an increase in employers' national insurance, which is obviously what came about yesterday. So from April next year, the rate of employers' national insurance is going up from a current rate of 13.8% up to 15%. Looking at it, it doesn't look like a huge increase as such, but as we'll come on to in a sec, no doubt, it does add up. Quite substantially in some cases. So you've got that. Second, and sort of linked to that a little bit, is that the secondary threshold at which employers start paying employers' national insurance is being reduced from the current level of £9,100 per year down to £5,000 a year. So in essence, what that means is the point at which employers get dragged into paying employers' national insurance is going to be a lot sooner than what is currently the case. So it's a bit of a two-pronged approach, I suppose, in that the rate is going up, but the point at which you start paying it is going to be brought forward effectively.
So if you're an employer, many of our clients are, what options are available to them in terms of, presumably this is like a tax on jobs.
Yeah.
This is almost like, right, maybe we've now got to sit down, am I right in saying this, and say we got to sort of maybe redo our budgets for next year. We've got to think about this in that. How do they go about tackling this?
I think it will have quite a knock-on effect. I mean, one thing that will help in terms of tackling this sort of slightly, I suppose, is that the employment allowance is being increased. So at the moment, eligible employers can get £5,000 a year as the employment allowance, which effectively means that the first 5,000 of employers' national insurance is covered by that allowance. That's going up to £10,500 from April next year. So that will help in terms of having a bigger allowance. So for the smallest of employers, hopefully the increases in the rate and the threshold may be covered by the increase in the employment allowance. Also with that, what's going to be quite helpful and make it a bit more accessible to employers is currently there's a cap on the amount of employer national insurance in the previous year that makes you eligible for the employment allowance in the following year, which is £100,000 at the moment. So if in the previous year your employer's national insurance liability was in excess of £100,000, you wouldn't be eligible for the employment allowance in the following year. that's being scrapped. So in theory, that opens up the employment allowance to a wider range of businesses and business sizes, obviously. But obviously that, yeah, we're only talking a £10,500 allowance versus if you've got a big, a big workforce, you're probably going to still see an increase. And I think based on the figures and the forecasts that I saw, this is by far the biggest tax raiser in the budget. I think it was the figure I saw. I think was about 25 billion or something.
Yeah, it was over 20, wasn't it? Yes.
Yeah. So you are talking a huge increase in the tax take, which obviously by association is a huge increase of cost to employers. I guess going back to your question about what can employers do, I think probably what's going to happen is employers going to sit down and reconsider their staffing budget, which would have a knock-on impact in terms of the number of job opportunities across the economy. I think
pay rises too could impact on future pay rises.
I think wage growth is probably going to be less positive than what it would have otherwise been, clearly because employers are having to, there's additional costs of employing people. But by association, if wages go up, your employer national insurance that's linked to that is also going to go up with it. So wage increases, I think, are going to be less than what otherwise would have been the case. And potentially, I think you could see prices going up as well, because again, businesses are going to have to recoup some of this extra cost, and you're either going to be looking at the prices they charge going up or cutting costs somewhere, which again is going to most likely be linked to your staffing costs.
Or a bit of both, as you just said.
Exactly right. Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah. So budgets will be looked at very carefully going forward. Yeah.
And one thing I should have mentioned as well, actually, again, it was more or less formally announced the night before the budget, is that the national living wage is going up as well next year.
Yeah. That was my next question.
So again, it's another hit to employers, and it's quite I guess a clever policy, if you like, for government to introduce, because in essence it doesn't really cost them anything. That falls straight on the employer in terms of the minimum wage is what it is. You're obliged to pay people
in
the
terms
minimum
of how
wage.
It looks. Yes.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. But again, it's an extra cost of employers. The NIC increase, and from we spoke about just then, the living wage going up. It is, employers are taking a big hit of this, the budget and the taxes that it's looking to raise, really.
So the message is, once again, that the cost of operating a payroll goes up yet again. That's the message from this budget, and it has happened previously as well. Okay, so that covers living wage, national insurance, and then a challenging tax in terms of people's take on it, Tom, or certainly aspects of it, inheritance tax.
Yeah. So again, I think it was widely expected that there would be some sort of reform to inheritance tax in some way or another. Yeah. Again, details clearly weren't there, and there was a lot of speculation as to what it would look like. So the main takeaways from an inheritance tax perspective is that there's been quite a significant restriction on the amount of business property relief combined with agricultural property relief that you can claim. So basically, it's being capped at a combined figure of £1 million that you'll get full relief on, which, as things stand currently, there isn't a value limit on the amount of BPR and APR relief you can get, subject to conditions being met. So with the introduction of this £1 million limit, basically, what we're saying is that any businesses or farms that have a value in excess of £1 million will be in some shape or form brought within the IHT net, whereas previously it would have been completely relieved and there'd be no IHT due. What was announced within the budget is that that would be the case, but they would benefit from a 50% relief on the IHT rates. So it's kind of almost spun it in a way to say, well, actually, you're getting a 50% discount on the normal rates, which is kind of right. But before they weren't paying anything at all. So actually, it's a 50% increase, if you like.
Yeah. So no, I get it. Yeah.
It's all how things are spun. But that one, we'll come on to the next one in a minute, which is pensions, which again was quite a big change from an IHT perspective. But I'm surprised these aren't getting a bit more coverage than what they are at the moment.
Well, I think Jeremy Clarkson, obviously, because he operates a farm
Yes, yeah.
Well, huge amount of land and farming in Oxfordshire. I think there's been quite a bit from him.
Oh, is that right? Yeah.
Yes, yes.
I guess to explain where I'm coming from, what it now means as things stand is that if you take a farm, for example, typically a lot of value in the farm is obviously within the land itself. If that or a significant proportion of that gets dragged into IHT when you're looking to pass it on and down generations, somewhere there's going to need to funds are going to need to be found to pay off the IHT liability. Which if that if a farmer isn't sat on a lot of cash, then where's that money going to come from?
So probably going to have to sell the land is what you are potentially implying there, and
I mean
that could be the end of the farming business within
well,
a
I mean
family, as you know.
That's what could happen. I mean,
Could
you know,
happen,
we're not
yeah.
saying that's the only option. You know, clearly there may be other options in terms of raising funds to pay the liability, but nonetheless, it suddenly creates quite a sort of hurdle to get over when you're looking at passing on, you know, a farm or a family business on to the next generation. Previously, or currently, I should say, because these changes aren't coming in until April 2026, you could pass it on without the worry of inheritance tax, whereas now that is quite a big consideration, especially where we're talking a big value either on the business or on the land when it comes to a farm. It's quite a big consideration in terms of how you then get that onto the next generation.
Yeah. So the example on the blog is a £3 million farm, and the liability that then kicks in when these changes take place.
Yeah.
So be sure to check that out, as we have a few examples of tax changes elsewhere as well.
Yeah.
So it's
So
circumstance dependent, but it's the same challenge for all
yeah.
when the time
Yeah.
comes to potentially look at passing the
Yeah.
farming business on through the generations.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly right. So yeah, that was quite a big change, and probably for certainly a lot of our clients will cause a lot of issues in terms of how to how to mitigate that liability, and potentially just means planning a lot further in advance might be necessary. So it is really a game changer, I think, in terms of succession planning.
So definitely need to consult your advisor, start planning, or even
Yeah.
plan
Yeah.
differently maybe now based
Potentially.
on what's
Yeah.
happened.
Yeah. Potentially
And
that might be the
and this will
case. Yeah.
impact on wills as well, I assume, and how that all works. So yeah, a
Yeah.
lot to
Yeah.
think about, right?
Yeah, exactly. So that covers off the sort of the transfer of businesses from an IHT perspective. The other one that I alluded to a minute ago was the fact that
Pensions.
pensions, yeah. So pensions, well, up until now and currently, typically have been outside of the scope of IHT, so it falls outside of your estate. What was announced yesterday is that actually any unused pensions, I think was the term, or death benefits, would on death fall within your estate, so basically be subject to inheritance tax, which
If your
again,
estate goes above a certain level, yeah.
if it goes above a certain level and you haven't got the nil rate bounds
Dependent
and
on your
allowances,
circumstances
yeah,
again.
as ever, yeah.
Yeah.
So suddenly that could bring in quite a significant figure into your estate. That also, the fact that people will have been paying into their pensions for a number of years, potentially as part of a sort of IHT strategy on the basis that it falls outside, and suddenly that then gets dragged within. So
Tax planning, yeah, of paying into a pension,
yeah, exactly. So I think I mentioned it in our predictions video that we did.
You did.
I was expecting potentially that there could be an introduction of limiting the income tax relief when you put into a pension.
Yes.
That didn't come about, and wasn't included yesterday. But to me, I think that would have been fairer probably to change the tax on going into a pension, because at that point you would know what you're dealing with before you contribute in. And obviously don't forget that once you contribute into a pension, potentially you're tying up those funds for quite a number of years. To me, that would have been fairer to do it that way moving forward, as opposed to changing the goalposts on funds that you've already put in and are obviously now within it. So but nonetheless, that's what's been introduced, and that's now sort of how the landscape's going to look, I guess.
And also, Tom, there was an additional freeze to IHT as well, wasn't there, in terms of
Mm.
the nil rate band and the resident nil rate band. So another 2 years, right?
Yeah, so the nil rate bands are being frozen until 2030, I believe.
Yeah, from
Um,
2028. Yeah.
yeah. So that in itself isn't necessarily a tax increase, but indirectly it is in the
Fiscal
same way
drag.
as exactly,
Fiscal
yeah.
drag. Yeah.
Now it's kind of it's laughable a little bit with a nil rate band because the main nil rate band, which is 325,000, and as I've just said, is going to be frozen until 2030. It's been that same figure since 2009.
Hmm.
So we're looking at effectively 21 years of the nil rate band value figure being the same in the face of asset prices going up probably quite considerably in that time period. So, not a tax increase, but given what we've just said, potentially a lot more estates will be dragged within the IHT regime because that nil rate band hasn't changed.
Yeah. So we'll have to look at it subsequently, but I think you can find figures that show that more and more estates are falling into IHT, if you want to call it that, being dragged into IHT through this frozen band.
Yeah, yeah.
And the value of that to the exchequer in terms of the tax take has been going up and up and up. So very valid point there, Tom. And then that leads us quite nicely into some of the capital gains tax changes that were announced yesterday.
Yeah. So keeping with the running theme, I guess there was increases in capital gains tax. Again, it was widely expected that it would be the case that capital gains would go up, and actually at one point there was an expectation that the rates could be aligned with income tax, which would have been quite a major increase relative to where they are currently.
That was widely mooted, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I'm fairly sure that Rishi Sunak commissioned a report back when he was Chancellor, back I think it's 2020, that and the findings of that suggested aligning with income tax, I believe. So it certainly wasn't off the table that could have happened. Now, what did happen actually wasn't that, but rates have gone up, but not as high as what was anticipated. So, potentially a bit of relief, I guess, if that's the right term, when it comes to capital gains tax with the budget. So, what was announced is that the rates of the sort of standard rates of capital gains tax would go up effective yesterday. So, in essence,
no chance of planning. Yeah.
Yeah. So in essence, before she even stood up to give the announcement, this was already in place. So the lower rate of capital gains tax, which was previously 10%, has been increased to 18%, and the upper rate, which was previously 20%, has gone up to 24%. Now, of note, that means now that the capital gains rates are the standard rates have been aligned with the residential property rates, which were and remain the same amounts. So, and I guess that's quite an interesting point in itself, given this sort of general focus over the last few years of trying to reduce down second homes. There was the SCLT increase yesterday as well, linked to that, which we won't touch on here. But they didn't touch capital gains tax on residential property, which I thought was quite interesting.
So they aligned the two rates, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So sets of rates, I should say, yeah.
Yeah. So I found that quite interesting, but nonetheless, the main rates have gone up and are in place now. So, and anyone selling assets that would be within that those standard rates, will see an immediate increase in what they're going to pay.
Yeah. And then that leads us from there. Investors relief and business asset disposal relief. There's a fair bit talked about BADR.
Yeah.
Prior to the budget.
Yeah. So again, there was at one point there was suggestions that the relief itself could go, which have been quite an extreme measure, given the whole point of business asset disposal relief is to encourage entrepreneurship, and obviously used to be called entrepreneurs relief. So that would have been quite an extreme measure in the face of saying they're looking to grow the economy and whatever else. So the relief stayed, and the £1 million allowance, lifetime allowance, remains as it is. But what will happen, and again, it's different to the standard rates, which, as I just mentioned, come into force straight away. The BADR rates will go up, but not until April next year. So at the moment, the BADR rate on that first £1 million of gains that qualify is 10%. Now, from April next year, that rate will increase to 14%. So an increase of 4% when we get to April next year, 6th of April next year. And then the following 6th of April, so 6th of April 2026, that rate will go up to 18%. So over the next couple of years, we're not far off the rate almost doubling, really, from where it is now.
So you could see a rush to disposals before the the increase in the rates. Right.
Could well do, yeah. So that was
could be a buyer's market in that regard. But
those rates will go up. So the attractiveness, if you like, of BADR has been curtailed slightly.
Slightly, yeah.
Perhaps not as bad as what was expected again, which is generally the sort of feeling with capital gains tax. It's not as bad as what it could have been. So that's going up. Investors' relief, again, similar. That those rates will be the same as what we've just said for BADR. So the attractiveness of it has been reduced slightly, but also I think you read this, didn't you? The
lifetime allowance has come down from 10 million, I think, to 1 million.
10 to 1, yeah. So again, it's
that's
kind
substantial.
of
That's a substantial cut. Yeah.
Investors' relief for people. It's not widely known, but it's for those investors that qualify. Well, up until now, it's been a very attractive and beneficial tax relief to get, given that £10 million allowance. That's been cut down. So it's still there, but it's just not got the same.
Not as generous as it once was.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So again, a sort of curtailing of that, and almost aligning effectively with the amount available and rates of BADR. So.
Yeah, no, and I think that covers our main points, Tom. So once again, thank you very much. We will, of course, be updating all our content given what has been announced. And if you want to find out more about the announcements, you can check out our autumn budget 2024 summary on our blog, written by my good colleague Tom, of course. And if you found this video useful, and you liked what you saw, then please do like, subscribe to our channels, and comment on the appropriate platform. Tom, as ever, thanks very much. Till next time, folks. Toodaloo.